Where'd you go?
It's like near the Appalachians, but it's not the Appalachians. It's just a whole bunch of hills and mountains.
Did you go?
I mean, I went 11 miles strong. Stay with the pack, you know.
Yeah, I love hiking. So I went to Myrtle Beach. I told you guys I was going to Myrtle Beach, right? Took my puppy. He's crazy. I don't know if I'll ever do that again. And I fell off of a horse. So I'll save that story till the end of class. So you can picture me falling off of a horse. All right. So where we left off was a week ago. So what I want to do, guys, is I'm going to give you a do now to do, but there are 4 choices, right? So you get to pick one of those 4 questions to answer so that we can review what we did before break. Okay, so remember we were working on pedigrees, and we started with our phenomenon with the Brazilian family, recall that? And where we left off, you guys were trying to analyze a pedigree to figure out how traits are passed on from parent to offspring. Okay, so how are you guys doing at home? You guys have a good break?
I did.
I know, me too. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see the do now that we're going to be working on, and everybody's going to pick a question to work on. Okay, so let me show you where that is to answer. So you have a choice as to which of the answers in the do now you want to answer. So I'm going to ask each of you to share your answers so that we can use that as a review for what we did before we left. Okay, so choose one of the answers from the Google slide and then answer the question directly into Google Classroom. Okay, so that's question number 1. You choose that one. Number 2 is on phenotype. Number 3 is on genotype. And number 4 has to do with alleles. Okay, so pick one of those 4 questions and we'll take about 5 minutes for you guys to answer it and then turn it in so that I know you're done. Okay, anybody at home, do you have questions on the do now? You'll also see that I posted the slide of that we reviewed before break. So there's a Google slide with some information that we used when we were doing pedigree. So you might need, if you need to refresh your memory, you can use that to answer some of the questions. Alrighty, so let's see. How about Molly? Molly, which question did you pick?
I did the question.
The allele question. Okay, so let's go to that one. Okay, so what is an allele?
Phytotype is an alternative form of a gene which is created by mutations found in the same place as the chromosome.
Okay, so it's a form of a gene. Does anybody remember how many forms of a gene that we inherit typically from our parents? Yep. 4. Okay, why 4? Okay, so we usually get 1 from each parent. So there's 2, right? We usually get an allele. Now there's some exceptions to that, but usually we get 2 alleles. So as Molly said, it is a form of a gene, right? So we get a different form of a gene from each. We can get different form of a gene from each parent. Okay, so that's what an allele is, right? And so mutations could occur over time. Where a gene, like you said, that's found on a gene, and the gene could become mutated. So sometimes mutations are favorable to the organism, sometimes they have no effect, and sometimes they're harmful. Okay, excellent. Let's see, this side of the room. How about Mark? Which question did you pick?
I chose phenotype.
Okay, phenotype. Go back to that one. All right, so what is a phenotype? What did you have for phenotype?
So that it was an organism's physical traits and appearance.
Okay, so it's a physical trait or appearance. So just like when we looked at the pedigree, we were looking at whether or not the individuals had albinism. Remember that? So that's a physical trait. So when you're describing a person's phenotype, physical for phenotype, it's the organism's physical appearance within that trait. So whether somebody had albinism or had normal pigmentation, or whether somebody has blue eyes or brown eyes. That's describing the physical characteristic or trait. All right, let's pick on somebody from home. How about, let's see if you guys picked any different answers. How about Tiana? Tiana, what question did you pick? Okay, good. Let's go to that first one here then. All right, so tell me about what this picture is and what does it mean?
So the picture shows like various organisms passed down like other organisms.
All right, so she said that it shows how, in this case, it was the example that we used last class, was how albinism is passed on from one generation to the next. Okay, anything else that you can interpret from this pedigree?
Whichever is
Okay, so she said that sometimes you can tell which is, if there's a trait that's more dominant, it would show more often. Okay, so you couldn't probably determine that in pedigree. Can anybody tell me a little bit about maybe what the symbols mean? Because you guys are going to build the pedigree in the next step here. So let's just refresh our memory as to what we said some of the symbols might mean. Yep.
the squares are very particular girls and if it's taken that person has albinism and if it's not that it's missing.
Okay, great. So, and she said that we have squares are males and circles are females, and then there's usually whatever trait we're looking at, and we were looking at albinism, that particular symbol is shaded in. Okay, good. All right, let's go to, we missed somebody. What question do we have? So we did question 1, we did question 2. How about question 3? Who answered question 3? Nobody answered question 3? How about at home? Anybody answer question number 3? No? What's genotype? What do you remember about a genotype? Mark.
It's the genetic code for a phenotype and helps like the directions of what the phenotype should be for organism.
Okay, so it's the genetic code or the genetic makeup that makes up that phenotype. So what is the genetic makeup of the individual that results in that particular phenotype? Okay? We usually looked at letters and we said there was some terminology that we can use to describe a genotype. Anybody remember what we said? Sam?
Isn't it like homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and heterozygous dominant?
Excellent. So homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous. Those could be the 3 terms that you can use to describe somebody's genotype. So somebody that's heterozygous, we used a couple of letters to represent. Remember, we had 2 alleles that represent that particular genotype. So what letters would you use to represent an individual? You can pick any letter that is heterozygous. Little a. How many of you agree? Little a for heterozygous. You agree? Anybody disagree? A couple of people disagree. And how many are not sure? Okay, a few people not sure. Okay, so those of you who disagree, because you said you disagree with little a. What would you think it should be?
Heterozygous, I think it'd be big A than little a.
Okay, big A, little a. And he's correct. So the term heterozygous means different. So the 2 alleles or the 2 letters that represent the alleles are different. Homozygous refers to the 2 letters or 2 alleles that are the same. So you can have 2 capital letters, which represent the dominant alleles, or 2 lowercase letters, which represent the recessive alleles. Okay? All right, good review with that. Any questions on genotype before we move on? All right, so we're going to practice using genotypes to apply to a pedigree. Okay. And I think we got all the questions. All right, good job, guys. So what we're going to do now is going to start building a pedigree through a story. It's called Helena's Story. And each of you are going to be assigned a section to build a pedigree individually, and then we're going to put it all together. Okay, but we're gonna do one example together as a class so that you know how to do it. So you're gonna build a pedigree, not on paper, but you're gonna do a digital pedigree. Okay, so let me go over that with you to show you how that's gonna work. All right, so number 2, build a pedigree telling a story. So we're going to be still working on the same learning expectation. Maya, can you read that learning expectation for us? What are we going to be learning?
I'm learning how to create scenario on individuals, how to create the passion for objects.
Okay, so that's still the same learning expectation that we've had before we were on break. So at the end of this assignment, you should be able to read and interpret scientific information to determine genetic relationships from what you're going to be reading. And you'll also be able to build a pedigree now, because we haven't done that yet. And you're going to be able to use what your prior knowledge from the pedigree in order to build a pedigree to show those correct relationships and to follow a trait in the family. Okay? So let's go to the Google slide. Let's go to the Google slide. The family tree. So in this Google slide, there's a slide here that's going to give you some information that we just reviewed on the pedigree, so you can use that as your reference. It tells you about what the brackets mean and the lines. Okay, so you can use that as your reference. And then here's what you need to do. We're going to read the narrative. We'll read the narrative together, and you're going to use the pedigrees to track a given trait. In this case, it's going to be albinism. So we're going to track that albinism over generations to see how it's passed on. On the slide that follows, you can copy and paste the symbols that you need to use. So you can copy and paste the circles and the squares, whether they're affected or not affected. And you can also copy lines in text boxes to build your pedigree. Okay? So here the first one is done for us. So this is going to be the first story, the first section that we're going to read. So you can go in here and you can copy and paste, cut and paste, or copy and paste to build a pedigree. You might have to shrink up the images in order to fit the pedigree on that slide. Okay? All right. So let's take a look at our first story and how we're going to build a pedigree. All right, so let's go to the next document, albinism, pedigree split narrative. So student number 1, I highlighted all the individuals in this one. So let's read this together and then we'll start building the pedigree. Okay, so now what I'd like you guys to do is to give it a try. Go back onto our Google slide that I just showed you. I think that's it right there. And try to build a pedigree using those individuals that are named there. Okay, so from this slide, start building a pedigree using those individuals. Remember, you can cut and you can paste all the images and even the lines. Okay, so I'll come around and help you as you guys are trying it. And we'll review it probably just at the end of class. All right, if we don't finish it, then we'll finish it for homework. And then when you come in next time, you're going to build your own pedigree from your own story that's going to be assigned. Okay? So her father is named Harry. I don't think it tells you that in the story, so I made him Harry. Harry and Henrietta, so they all start with H's.